If you're running in the wrong direction, speed doesn't matter. Frank Sonnenberg. It's easy to feel like we're all under the pressure to get somewhere faster. We measure how long things take. We set deadlines. We look at where we thought we'd be by now and compare it to where we actually are. Or you see somebody else getting further ahead and you start wondering if you're falling behind. And this happens in almost every part of our life. We want something different than what we have today. Yet, paying attention to time isn't wrong because time matters and you shouldn't waste it. And granted, there are moments when you need urgency, and there are moments when you've probably waited too long to act. But there's something that matters more than how quickly you're moving. You need to know where you're going. Think about how much of your life can become routine without you ever making a conscious decision about whether that routine is actually taking you somewhere you want to be. You're busy, and because you've been working hard, it's easy to assume that you've been making progress. But those aren't necessarily the same thing. You could put a lot of effort into your life and still keep producing versions of the same results. You can be disciplined, responsible, and consistent while moving in a direction that isn't taking you where you keep saying you want to go. But if there's something in your life you want to change, eventually you have to stop asking yourself, how long is it going to take? And ask the harder question. Are the things that I'm doing right now actually leading me there? Most of us can answer the question, what do I want? Maybe you want to make more money, get in better shape, have a better career. Whatever it is, you probably have a picture in your head of what you'd like your life to look like. But knowing what you want and knowing how to get there are two very different things. Saying you want to be in better shape gives you a destination, but that doesn't tell you what you need to change, like the way you eat, how you train, or what you're willing to give up to make it happen. Same thing applies professionally. Saying you want a different career doesn't mean the work that you're doing today is preparing you for it. You can spend another 5 years becoming incredibly good at what you currently do and still be no closer to becoming qualified for what you say you'd rather do. That's the difference between having a destination and having a direction. Because wanting something badly enough doesn't move you any closer to it. At some point, what you say you want has to show up in what you repeatedly do. And this is where discipline can actually work against you. Yes, that probably sounds strange, especially when we spend so much time talking about discipline as something positive. But discipline is merely a tool. It'll make you more consistent at whatever you decided to do. But it doesn't automatically make what you've decided to do effective. You can actually work incredibly hard at the wrong thing. And from the outside, that can seem impressive. But effort doesn't get to decide whether the strategy is working. Think about this. If you wanted to drive from Texas to Florida, and you start heading west, driving faster doesn't solve the problem. Driving longer doesn't solve it either. Yes, you're covering a lot of ground, but you're also getting further away. However, on the highway, there's road signs that'll tell us if the way we're going is the right way, but generally not in our personal lives. And there are times when the most accountable thing you can do is admit that your effort isn't the problem. Rather, what you're applying that effort to is. Now, that doesn't diminish the work you've done, but the work you've already done also doesn't always earn you the results you want. So don't confuse your willingness to suffer as evidence that you're on the right path. Yes, Discipline matters. Persistence matters. Hard work matters. But none of them can navigate for you. And the harder you're willing to push, the more important it becomes to occasionally look up and make sure you're still heading the right way. However, even when you're heading in the right direction, don't expect the route to stay exactly the way you planned it. Things change, and circumstances you couldn't predict, they like to pop up. Something that made sense when you started might not make sense today because you have information now that you didn't have then. Think about what you do when you're driving somewhere and then you miss a turn. You don't pull over and decide the entire trip is ruined. You adjust. But we usually have a harder time doing that with things that we consider more important. Once we've invested enough into something, changing course can start to feel like admitting that we were wrong. But there's a difference between abandoning something because it got difficult and abandoning just because the information changed. It's your job to recognize which one you're doing. Your compass isn't supposed to give you one set of directions and then disappear. You need to keep checking it because movement creates new information. Sometimes you'll need to slow down. Sometimes you'll need a different route. And sometimes you may have to admit that what you thought you wanted isn't what you want anymore. And that takes a different kind of discipline. You can remain committed to where you're trying to go without being committed to every decision you made about how you were going to get there. Yet, one of the easiest ways to lose your direction is to start measuring your life against somebody else's timeline. You can see what they've built. And before long, their progress starts creating pressure in your life. And you can start asking yourself, why am I not there yet? But comparison has a way of turning somebody else's clock into your standard. And that can pull you towards things you never really chose. You can be making quality progress in a life that fits you and still convince yourself you're losing because somebody else appears to be moving faster. But the thing is, they're likely moving in a different direction. There's nothing wrong with seeing what other people have done and learning from it. And there's nothing wrong with being challenged by somebody else's discipline, their success, or their consistency. But inspiration and imitation are not the same thing. Their results can give you information. However, that shouldn't define your destination. Because once you start living by somebody else's timeline, you could become incredibly motivated to arrive somewhere you never really wanted to go. Which brings us to the part that might be the hardest to admit. You can succeed, but at the wrong thing. You can get the promotion, build that business, buy the big house, reach that number that you wanted in your bank account. You can spend years becoming exactly what you thought you were supposed to become, and eventually realize you don't particularly like the life that came with it. That's why success by itself isn't enough to tell you whether you got things right. Maybe you wanted it because it genuinely mattered to you. Maybe it represented security, purpose, and a challenge. Or maybe you wanted it because it appeared to look like success. Because that's what someone else expected from you. Because walking away would have been embarrassing. Or because you'd already invested too much to reconsider your decision. And that's why the clock eventually does matter. Not because you have to arrive by some arbitrary age or beat somebody else there. It matters because your time is limited. And where you spend it is one of the strongest statements you'll ever make about what you value. So don't just ask whether you're capable of reaching the goal. Ask yourself whether the destination deserves what it's going to cost you to get there. Because there's something worse than taking longer than you'd hope to build the life you actually want. It's making great time toward a life that's not really you. It will always come down to you to decide what determines whether your life is moving forward or not. But your life isn't happening on someone else's schedule. It's happening while you're making decisions every day that are taking you somewhere. Some of those decisions might feel important when you make them, but most won't. It's those ordinary choices about where you direct your attention, what you pursue, or what you walk away from. Then eventually, those choices become a direction, and direction has consequences. You don't have to have your entire life mapped out. You don't need to know exactly where you'll be 5 or 10 years from now. But you should know what you're moving towards. Yes, 5 years from now, it's going to arrive. And so will 10. But the question won't be whether you could have gotten there faster. The question will be what there is. And when you will finally arrive, whether you'll recognize the life in front of you as the one you meant to build. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.